Welcome to the Ghost Show online, my fiends, booze, and ghouls. Your hosts, Seika Groves, Rachel Benter, and Ian Russell will discuss all things paranormal. Prepare to be afraid.
Today we're actually going to be talking about witches, and we're going to sort of go from what Hollywood's done to them to maybe talking about some, actual people who view themselves, as a witch, and they practice certain things. There's so many different kinds of witches, I guess, from a head witch to...
It's evolved. It feels like it's really sort of evolved.
I don't know if it's evolved. I think it's just that it's where you see yourself. It's very personal, I think, for people, right? This is not... there are people who belong to covens, and there are people who belong to, different groups, and they practice in different ways, and they maybe have more formal, rituals and things. And then there's a lot of, people that just like to practice on their own. And so we're going to kind of talk about those things and dispel some of, the myths. But we're going to really start off with Hollywood, because Hollywood has sort of been the impetus of what people think witches are, right? And how they see them and how they view them. And then we're going to get into some actual history too. So who wants to start? Because I know that, Ian, you're going to talk about a movie. Rachel, you wanted to talk about one that kind of had an impact on you. And then I'm going down the history route. So
okay, yeah.
Right, so I'm going to talk about Hollywood films.
Should we start with Ian first then? And
okay.
Yeah. So Ian, you want to take it away?
All right. Well, I am going to talk about one of the most hated Hollywood movies of all time.
And I'm right up there with the hating.
And that movie is The Blair Witch Project.
Yeah.
Now, as I say, it seems to be one of the most hated movies ever made. I am not one of those people. They're 99 out of 100 can't stand it. I am that one person. And obviously I'm not alone, because this movie made about $250 million at the box office.
Oh.
But
because at the time that was what was going on, right? When did it come out?
Late 1990s, 1999, I think.
Oh, okay, so that's around the same time as the movie that I'm going to talk about, The Craft. I think that came out in 1996, and it seems like that 90s era.
Remakes, hasn't it? The Craft.
Does it? Yeah, unfortunately. I think it has a series
and or even like a TV show or something too. So anyway, all right. So I'm going to let you guys go.
Sorry, and I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's all right. That's all right.
Let's go.
So, for those who have never seen this movie, and probably there are people out there that don't want to see it, it was one of the first films that came forth in the process of being a first-person viewpoint. And in this case, it is from the viewpoint of 3 film students who go into the woods to seek out the historical legend of the Blair Witch. And it's all done through their video cameras and their film cameras. And I have to admit, why do I like this movie? Now, I will admit the plot is is very thin. The plot was very thin in that terms, not very exciting. But what captured me is because of my filmmaking background, I could appreciate how the filmmakers presented this motion picture of going through the video cameras, going through the 16 millimeter film camera that the actors had. And now I caught it right away just because of my background, but there were a lot of people went to see this movie and thought that the footage was real.
Yes,
just because of the way it was presented.
Mm-hmm.
But as I say, it's a very thin plot. People will complain, okay, well, it's called the Blair Witch, but there's no witch. There's no witch in this movie. Well, that's not entirely true. Because it's the backstory is where the witch is.
Yeah.
It's the fictional backstory, obviously, in the filmmaking, that then causes these three student filmmakers to go into the woods and try to seek out the Blair Witch and get into the problems that they do. And so I've got the backstory here of the quote witch. So we'll go through that, and it reads, the core of the legend is the story of Ellie Kedward, a Blair resident accused of witchcraft in 1785 and sentenced to death by exposure. Ellie Kedward was banished from Blair after many children accused her of performing witchcraft, and though she's presumed dead from the exposure, she was hung from a tree with stones tied to her limbs. The following year, all those who accused her and half the town's children vanished without a trace, making way for the curse and the legend of the Blair Witch, with the townspeople leaving Blair and vowing to never mention her name ever again. The town was rediscovered in 1824 and renamed Burkittsville, which actually is a real town in Maryland, which is where the film was shot.
Right.
It's interesting to note that those people out there, other than myself, who did like the film, think of it more as like a
folklore tale.
A cult following film, and these people go to Burkittsville in Maryland, and they've been stealing the sign that says "Welcome to Burkittsville" or Burkittsville population whatever, and the town council actually had to change all the signs to stop all these film freak fanatics from going in and stealing the town signs.
Wow. Great.
Okay, so to continue, the town was rediscovered in 1824, renamed Burkittsville, and the following year, a 10-year-old girl named Evelyn Treacle drowned in the shallow water of Tappy East Creek, with several eyewitnesses claiming that a ghostly white hand reached out of the water and pulled her in. Eileen's body was never recovered, and the creek became clogged, with the water useless and killing every living being who drank it. Of course, this incident was blamed on the Blair Witch, and it wasn't the only one. In 1886, an 8-year-old kid named Robin Weaver got lost in the forest around Blair, met an old woman whose feet, quote, didn't touch the ground. And that is the backstory of the Blair Witch, which then the three fictional film students in the film went to investigate. So there's your witch.
So here's my question: is there any truth to the stories, or was it literally just?
No, it's completely fiction.
Okay.
It's completely fiction.
So
Yeah.
what they've done, it sounds like they kind of cherry picked from other stories from other locations, Salem being one of them. And
Yeah,
no,
if you read into what I just
yes.
read to you,
Mhm.
if you know paranormal and sort of witchcraft history, you can see that where they have drawn from, the
Right.
filmmakers have gotten their information from and just sort of compiled it and created a whole new story out of it.
Yeah, because to me it sounds like a little bit of Salem, a little bit of Hansel and Gretel, and
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
and
Exactly. Yeah.
and
But
a couple of
but
other things
there's your
put
backstory, and
together.
there is the
Yeah.
Blair Witch.
Right. So interesting in the way that that film was handled. Now, my thing with the film is that I just found it was very thin plot wise. I know a lot of people
Yeah.
had problems watching it too because it was handheld, and so it was very bumpy in motion. People were getting sick from
I've
trying
heard
to
that.
watch
Yes.
the
Yeah.
movement.
Yes.
And that for me, it really was just a very thin storyline, and the characters had zero development, really. Like, you never really got to figure out who they were or what their sort of objectives were, other than they were these film students. And so to me, that's where the film falls down a lot. The idea, though, of shooting it that way was interesting because no other, there had never been sort of a horror movie filmed that way before.
That
So
was
it
the
did,
first one.
yeah, it did add realism to it, which is why I think a lot of people believe that it was real. The thing with that was they didn't really get too much into the witch unless you read into the backstory, right? So you really didn't find out what exactly was going on. At least I felt like it was kind of a literally Salem meets Hansel and Gretel scenario,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But this is the way that Hollywood likes to perpetuate.
Build the suspense. Yeah.
Well, and also too, it's a different way of treating a witch story, right?
Mm.
So unlike, where you go back to the sort of tropes of
Yeah.
not just Hollywood, but fairy tales too, right? I mean, we have stories like Snow White, and we have, these other stories where the witch it's really weird. It's like you get the crone, the hag, the wart-nosed, Wizard of
you
Oz.
think of the Wizard of Oz.
Right.
The
then,
Wicked Witch of the West with the pointy hat and the big nose with the warts on it.
And had to be ugly, right? And that's sort of a real what's happening there is that they're using witches as a scapegoat to try and teach a morality lesson, right? If you're bad, you're ugly and old and craggy and you can do evil things. But then you have like Glinda the Good Witch, who's beautiful, and she's able to do lovely things for you. And I think that this is sort of the thing that happened. And I'm going to step back for a minute because, Rachel, I want you to talk about the movie that you like and that had an influence. And then we're going to talk about the history side of it.
Okay, yeah, no, I was really intrigued. I was really interested there, Ian. I feel like that's such a contrast to the movie that I'm about to talk about, which is The Craft. And this came out, in 1996. And I think it still remains popular. So it's basically, for those that don't know, it's an American teen supernatural horror film directed by Andrew Fleming, based from a different screenplay. And it's basically, it stars Robin Tunney, Neve Campbell, Rachel True, my gosh. And it's basically 4 outcast teenage girls in an LA high school who pursue witchcraft for their own gain and subsequently experience negative repercussions as a result. And the reason why I like this movie is because I felt like it covered an aspect of a Wicca paganism that they highlight in the movie. It covers that aspect. I don't want to say in a realistic view, but they use certain terms like the 3x3. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, Seika, where Wiccans.
They really played into all of the tropes in that.
Yes.
I'm just gonna
Yes.
say, like, every Wiccan possible
Yep.
thing that you could think of was in that movie.
It so was, and that's what I liked about it. And it just came around at that time, was perfect. In the 90s, I honestly believe we were going through that phase where everybody was into Buffy and Angel. Everybody was into that, having a supernatural.
It hasn't changed much.
Oh, it hasn't?
No, and I think there's a new, like, The Craft, there's a new one that came out in 2020.
Yes,
So
there is.
I think they kind of revisited it, or maybe it's like the renewal or something, like it's new group of girls, but the same concept, right?
Right. I think there's another series out there. Oh gosh, what's it called? I can't remember, but oh gosh, it's.
Well, there's been so many. I mean,
but there is, yeah. There's been too many, but but I think this is the best one. I don't know. I love the soundtrack. I really sort of enjoyed all of it. I don't know if anyone knows the general gist of the plot, but the three girls are not very popular in school, and they all worship a powerful deity they call Manon, and they spot one of the girls that's new to the school, Sarah. She levitates a pencil in class, and then the group is convinced that she's the right girl to complete that coven as the fourth making of a coven. So they kind of convince her to get involved with what they're doing, and sort of introduce her to paganism and witchcraft and Wicca. And it all sort of goes a little south once they start practicing magic, but at first they think it's great. Things are starting to go their way. Scars are starting to leave. They're becoming more popular. Someone that didn't fancy, was attracted to Sarah before is now attracted to her, like the famous boy, so popular boy. So yeah, I think I liked it for the time. I think it definitely had a ripple effect on the Wiccan community. I think there was definitely a lot more interest in the Wiccan community after this movie came out, just from my own personal observations. When it came out in 1996, I was just going to college. I was a goth myself. And so yeah, I liked it for that. But oh my gosh, I used to roll my eyes at people that was like, oh, I'm a witch too. I've seen The Craft. It's like, that doesn't instantly make you a Wiccan or a pagan.
Let's talk about the reality.
Sure.
Right?
Before we leave Hollywood and go to reality, there's another
go to reality
franchise there's another franchise we need to talk about.
Sure.
Okay. That is the Harry Potter movies.
Right.
Oh, is that, well, aren't they wizards?
True enough.
Well, they're wizards.
Wizard,
yeah.
Right? I mean, it's just kind of a male attribute to, and I mean, Hermione was a girl. She would have been considered a witch.
Yeah. Some of the, I can't think of some of the teachers, but the old woman was a witch. And but what's really cool, other than the fact that the Harry Potter movies are great movies,
and charmed as well.
In terms of the witches, it's interesting that they're portrayed as normal people, normal kids, normal boys and girls, normal men and women, as opposed to these evil hags that practice magic and witchcraft and.
Well, and that's the thing, right? I mean, when we get into it, as I was saying, it's it kind of goes. I mean, but then Harry Potter did have some of that in it too, right?
Oh, sure, it did. Yeah,
it did have that sort of the two sides of things, and and then there was an English, a UK show, and I want to remember what it was called now. It's like Girls of Trinity or whatever. And I really feel like Harry Potter was a massive ripoff of that show.
Yeah.
Because that show was out long before Harry Potter, and I just feel like it's that was sort of how Harry Potter came about.
Oh yeah.
But St. Trinian's, yeah, and so it was, a whole school of witches, and so we have all that. Then of course we have things like American Horror Story, who introduced a season essentially around witches and Wiccan and those beliefs, and of course Stevie Nicks popped into the show just to legitimize the whole thing. Because she's well known as being a white witch, and so she made her appearance on the show. Now, so let's talk about where we sort of come from in history, right? Witches. What exactly are they? Who are they? How did they develop? Why do we see them in a certain way today? And, what makes witches today different or the same as witches 5, 6, 8, 1,000 years ago? And that's an interesting question, because I actually have relatives who were, one of my my grandmother's family members was Sarah Good in Salem, who was one of the first women accused of witchcraft there. And then I have also relations in a UK Scottish book of witches that kept a list of people that they thought were witches. And so it's kind of an interesting thing. But outside of that, who were these people? Were they men? Were they women? I think it depends on the culture that you look at, right? Because in some cultures, it seems to be more of a male dominated field of practice. And then we have what we sort of look at as the European or the Celtic, which is what I think most people are most comfortable with, right? Because there's many cultures. I mean, Africa, China, you name it, across the world. But I think what happened in the mythos of reality is that most of these people were women. And why were they women? It's because women were the ones who nurtured the household. So they were the ones that carried the knowledge for medicines and medicinals and using plants and different things as medicinals. And so we end up with, when we start to see the rise of Christianity, we start to see this being looked at as a negative thing. As science and religion initially were somewhat interconnected way back when, we start to see the movement towards modern science or modern medicine, and these people practicing these old sort of folk remedies are starting to, become persecuted because they're not towing the line. They're not even Christian at this point, right? So they could be Celtic, they could be Druids, they could be Goths or Visigoths, or all of the multiples of different, people that were out there at that time. So let's just be really real here, when Christianity rolled in, this is when we start to see all of this becoming a problem. And, we can't really go back in time and go, well, in like whatever time, they were still considered to be bad or evil or what. We actually don't have any written evidence of that. We can go back to some Sumerian text, and we can look at some cuneiform, some Sumerian text. They talk about witchcraft. But it's not considered evil or bad, or,
right.
It's talked about in a way that is often more beneficial than it is non. So we start to see the introduction of the church, and I really hate to say it, but the Christian church has a lot to answer for over the centuries.
Oh no.
Many, many things. Mm-hmm. And their persecution of witches is one of those things, because most of these people were not doing anything wrong. These people were helping to heal people. They were trying to, keep their families alive. They were often older women. And why were they older women? Well, because at this stage in our lives, when we get to, and I mean, heck, most women would be lucky to hit my age in those times, right? But 50-year-old woman back in 1000 or 950 would have been considered an old woman. She was old. She'd been around for 50 years, and she had accumulated knowledge of, how to look after her family, what plants were good to help certain things, if you got a bug bite or you had a stomach ache or you had a headache. So, this was an accumulative knowledge. So this is why we always end up with these images of these old lady hags as,
Right.
and I know that now, we look at it in sort of the 3 phases, right? You've got, your crone, and you've got
Maid, the mother, and the crone.
That's right. The maid, the mother, and the crone. Exactly. So the young, literally mother age, and then the crone. And Hollywood really plays with this. But in history, I think for the most part, these people were targeted particularly by the church. I mean, the Spanish Inquisition is a perfect example of that. After or before Elizabeth came to the throne in England, and Lizzie the Oneth, right? We had Mary, Bloody Mary, right?
Oh, yeah.
Staunch Catholic, who
A staunch
again,
Catholic, yeah.
was known for her persecution of people who didn't want to be Catholic. And so whether they were a witch or not, that was a perfect way to label them so that they would be executed, moved out of the way, and this is really where it came into play. I mean, persecution was huge. And so we have the Catholic Church rolling through history, as they do. And
as they do.
Laying down their rules and regulations and
right.
how these things work. And quite frankly, to me, it's nonsense.
Thank you for watching The Ghost Show Online. Join your hosts again next week as they discuss more tales of the supernatural, the paranormal, and all things spectacular. See you soon.